Not tonight, buddy. The words came out low, almost swallowed by the roar of rain pounding the empty streets of Beaufort, South Carolina, where the storm had swept in like it had a score to settle. A white German shepherd, fur plastered to his lean frame with streaks of mud and rain, stood in the middle of a kennel floor that had long since forgotten warmth, water rising slowly around his paws, reflections of flickering lights making his amber eyes gleam like small lanterns in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of wet wood, iron, and a faint tang of mildew, and each drop of water hitting the corrugated metal roof sounded like tiny hammers striking against steel. A note, soggy and barely legible, had been pinned under the chain-link mesh with a single bent nail, fluttering with each gust of wind that forced its way through cracks and loose panels. Please don't let them take him tomorrow. Snow shifted uneasily, his claws scraping faintly against the concrete, the sound muffled by the water pooling at the base of the walls. And yet there was a precision in the way he pressed his body against the metal, a measured patience that suggested he knew something the world outside had forgotten. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole drove slowly down the flooded lane, tires sloshing through puddles that reflected lightning like shards of glass. He pulled the hood of his jacket tighter, boots pressing on the gas pedal as if each footfall could shield him from the cold that seeped into the truck through open windows, carrying with it the scent of wet pine, salt, and asphalt heated briefly by the storm before cooling instantly. The faint, irregular noise, a tap, a scratch, a muffled whine, caught his attention, and he slowed, peering into the dim blur of rain and shadows. There, behind a fence with a crooked sign reading private property, "No trespassing," was a faint white blur that shifted against the dark, a hint of fur glistening in the intermittent glow of the streetlight, eyes locking on him for a heartbeat before dipping again into shadow. Something inside him stirred, a memory he had tried to bury, the night of the flood 7 years ago when he had been the first to arrive but too late to save all he could, the quiet horror of watching water claim what should have been protected. Marcus stepped out of the truck, boots sinking into the muddy shoulder, rain soaking through jeans and jacket, droplets running down the collar of his neck, a cold reminder that nature could be indifferent and yet demand witness. The chain link rattled gently, a whisper through the storm, and Snow's growl was low, almost imperceptible, a vibration that traveled through the metal into Marcus's chest, an urgent pulse that demanded attention without shouting. He crouched, eyes narrowing, reading the posture, the tension in each limb, the way the water clung to muscle and bone, and he knew the dog was waiting for him to act. He glanced around, noting the uneven boards, the broken pallet that had become a makeshift raft in the rising water, the faint glow from a lantern hanging just inside a doorway he had not yet reached, and he felt the pull of a responsibility he had no intention of ignoring. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the soaked concrete, and revealing a corner where a plastic bag bobbed just above the water, caught on a jagged piece of rebar, its contents hidden, but promising a clue, a story, a plea. Snow's ears twitched, and he stepped forward cautiously, pawing at the surface, urging Marcus to follow, tilting his head toward the partially submerged note with a gaze that carried both trust and a silent command. Marcus reached the fence, hand finding the latch slick with rain, fingers gripping the cold metal as he pulled and twisted, water lapping at his boots, his breath shallow, and even as he forced the gate open, the smell of wet fur and earth mingling with the metallic tang of the rain-soaked kennel. Snow pressed against him as the gate swung free, and together they stepped into the shallow flood that covered the floor, each careful movement sending ripples through the water, droplets scattering over the note, further blurring the ink but not the message. Marcus bent down, hand hovering over the soggy paper, fingertips brushing the wet fibers, and he read the words again, louder in his own mind than any sound the storm could. "Produce. Please don't let them take him tomorrow." Snow rested a paw on Marcus's shoulder as if confirming the urgency, a silent pact of understanding between soldier and dog, both aware that the night was still young, the storm still fierce, but that together they could face what lay ahead. The kennel smelled of damp wood, old straw, and a faint trace of canine musk, mixing with the electric scent of the approaching storm, each inhale a reminder of mortality, each heartbeat a measure of resolve. Marcus rose slowly, lifting his gaze to meet Snow's unwavering stare, amber eyes reflecting lightning and a fierce intelligence that seemed to challenge the world. If this dog could endure, so could they both. The first faint light of dawn crept along the horizon, diffused by rolling clouds, painting the water in hues of gray and silver. And yet inside the kennel, within the flood and the chaos, there was a stillness, a quiet anticipation, the sense that something had shifted, that a chain of events had begun, that what had been locked away, forgotten, or abandoned was now on the brink of revelation. Marcus did not move for several seconds. He stood with one hand on the bent gate and the other wrapped around the wet note, rain streaming from the brim of his cap, watching Snow as the dog turned away from open air and stepped deeper into the flooded kennel. That was what stopped him. Any frightened animal would have run toward the truck, toward warmth, toward the open road and the first chance at life. Snow did not. He looked back once, water dripping from his white muzzle, then lowered his head toward the far corner where the plastic bag still bobbed against a broken board. Marcus knew that look. He had seen it overseas in Marines who could not speak because the smoke was too thick, but whose eyes kept pointing toward the one place everyone else was missing. The storm pressed harder against the roof, rattling loose nails and shaking the old walls until the whole building seemed to breathe around them. Marcus stepped forward, water rising over the tops of his boots, cold seeping through his socks, through bone, through memory. Snow moved with him, not close enough to cling, but close enough to guide. The dog's paws made slow circles in the murky water, each step careful, each pause deliberate. The kennel had once been painted blue, maybe cheerful in another life, but now the walls were stained with rust, the ceiling sagged in places, and the rows of empty runs stood like quiet witnesses. No barking came from the others. No scratching. No sound of life except the rain, the water, and Snow's uneven breathing. Marcus reached the corner and knelt, feeling beneath the surface until his fingers closed around slick plastic. The bag had been tied twice and weighed down with a small training collar, the kind used for working dogs before they earned their permanent gear. He pulled it free. Snow stepped closer, nose nearly touching Marcus's hand, ears pinned back as if the bag carried a scent he both feared and trusted. Marcus wiped mud from the outside and held it beneath the flickering lantern light. Inside was another piece of paper, folded small, protected from the flood. Beneath it lay a faded photograph. He could not make out the faces yet, but he saw enough to feel his chest tighten. A young boy, a man in a kennel uniform, and Snow, younger then, cleaner, sitting proudly between them with a red bandana around his neck. Before Marcus could open the paper, headlights swept across the cracked windows. Snow stiffened. Not scared. Ready. Marcus slowly rose. Outside, an engine idled beyond the fence, low and steady beneath the rain. A door opened. Boots hit gravel. Someone cursed under his breath. Then a flashlight beam cut through the kennel doorway and landed across Marcus's chest. The man holding it was broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark rain jacket with the Harbor Ridge Kennel's logo stitched over the pocket. His hair was slicked back from the rain, his face clean shaven, his smile too calm for a man finding a stranger inside a flooded building. Marcus had known men like him, men who looked polite because they had practiced it. The man stopped just beyond the doorway and lifted the flashlight a little higher. "You lost, Sergeant?" he asked. Marcus did not answer right away. He slid the plastic bag under his jacket and rested one hand on Snow's damp neck. The dog's muscles trembled beneath his palm, but not from weakness anymore. From warning. "This place is flooding," Marcus said. "You left the dog locked inside." The man's smile thinned. "Facility was cleared yesterday. That one should not have been back here." Snow released a low sound, not loud enough to be called a growl, but deep enough to change the temperature in the room. The man glanced at him, and for one brief second the calm left his face. Marcus saw it. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. "Name?" Marcus asked. The man shifted the flashlight away from Snow and back to Marcus. "Deputy Warden Travis Blake. I manage this property for the county contract. And you are trespassing." Marcus looked around at the rising water, the broken pallet, the locked door, the note still softening in his fist. "That is what worries you." Travis took one step inside, water spreading around his polished boots. "What worries me is people interfering with animals they do not understand." That dog has a record. He is unstable. He was scheduled for transfer. Marcus held his gaze. Transfer where? Travis did not blink. That is not your concern. Snow moved then, slow and deliberate, placing himself between Marcus and Travis. The dog's white coat glowed under the lantern, soaked and streaked with gray, but his posture was no longer pleading. It was protective. Marcus felt something old and solemn settle inside him. The storm, the note, the hidden bag, the boy in the photograph, the fear in Travis Blake's eyes when he looked at Snow. Pieces were beginning to rise from the flood. Marcus did not know the full shape yet, but he knew enough to keep standing. Travis pointed toward the gate. Walk away, Sergeant. Let the county handle it. Marcus looked down at Snow, then at the note in his hand. The ink had blurred, but the plea remained. Please do not let them take him tomorrow. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket beside the photograph. No, Marcus said quietly. Not this time. Travis Blake stood in the doorway as if the storm belonged to him, his flashlight cutting a pale stripe across the flooded floor, his boots planted just beyond the reach of the deepest water. Marcus did not step back. He kept one hand near Snow's collar and the other over the pocket where the note and photograph rested against his chest, already damp from the rain that had soaked through his jacket. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only voices were the rain on the metal roof, the soft electric buzz of the lantern, and the slow, uneven breathing of the white K9 standing between two men who wanted very different things from the night. Travis lowered the flashlight a few inches, just enough for Marcus to see the irritation behind his calm. You Marines always think every situation is a mission, he said. Sometimes an animal is just an animal. Marcus looked at Snow. The dog's ears stayed forward. His tail was low but still, not afraid. Listening. Not when somebody leaves him locked in rising water, Marcus said. Travis gave a small laugh with no warmth in it. You do not know the history here. Then explain it. Travis's jaw worked once. Outside, thunder rolled over the low country, deep and distant, like heavy furniture being dragged across the sky. That dog was removed from active placement, he said. Behavioral concerns. Liability issues. Paperwork is filed. County knows. State knows. You breaking into this kennel will not change that. Marcus let the words settle. He heard how neat they sounded. Too neat. Like a floor mopped clean before guests arrived. Snow shifted, his shoulder brushing Marcus's leg, and the contact pulled Marcus back into the cold reality of the water creeping around them. The dog was tired. His body trembled now, not with warning, but with exhaustion. Marcus could feel it through his jeans. That changed everything. There would be time for questions later. Right now, Snow needed warmth. Marcus bent slightly, keeping his eyes on Travis. I am taking him to a veterinarian. Travis's expression tightened. You are taking nothing from this property. Watch me. The words came quietly, not as a threat, as a decision. Marcus reached down and looped one arm beneath Snow's chest. The dog resisted for half a second, turning his head toward the far wall again, toward the corner where the plastic bag had been hidden. Marcus leaned close to his ear. I have it, he whispered. I have what you showed me. Snow seemed to understand. His body softened just enough for Marcus to lift him. He was heavier than he looked, all soaked fur and working dog muscle, but far lighter than a K9 like him should have been. That angered Marcus more than Travis's words. Not loud anger. The kind that went silent and stayed. Travis stepped into his path. Put him down. Marcus stopped. Snow's head rested against his shoulder, breath warm and shallow against his neck. A flash of lightning filled the doorway, turning every drop of rain silver. Marcus saw Travis clearly then. The clean jacket. The county badge clipped to his belt. The careful face of a man used to being believed. Move, Marcus said. Travis stared at him, then glanced toward the fence line, as if measuring how much of this could be seen from the road. That glance told Marcus more than any confession could have. Men with nothing to hide did not count witnesses in a storm. Finally, Travis stepped aside, but only by a few inches. You are making a mistake, Sergeant Cole. Marcus froze. He had not given his last name. Snow lifted his head. The lantern flickered behind them. The rain seemed to pause for one strange second. Marcus turned slowly. How do you know my name? Travis's mouth closed. For the first time, the practiced calm cracked. It was small, almost nothing, but Marcus saw it. He had spent years reading faces in places where one twitch could mean danger, fear, or guilt. Travis recovered too quickly. Your plates. Military sticker. Easy guess. Marcus said nothing. His truck was parked outside the fence, facing the road. Its rear plate was nowhere near the doorway. Travis knew it. Marcus knew it. Snow knew something deeper. The dog gave a low, broken whine and pressed his wet nose against Marcus's chest, exactly where the hidden photograph rested. Marcus carried him out into the storm. Water splashed around his boots as he crossed the yard, every step slow and steady, refusing to hurry for the man watching from behind. The rain struck Snow's white fur and ran off in gray streams. Marcus reached the truck, opened the passenger door, and laid the dog across the seat, wrapping him in an old Marine Corps blanket he kept behind the bench. Snow shivered hard once, then fixed his eyes on the kennel again. Marcus climbed in, started the engine, and turned the heater all the way up. Through the windshield, Travis stood under the broken awning, one hand at his side, the flashlight hanging loose. He did not wave. He did not call the sheriff. He only watched. Marcus pulled onto the flooded lane, tires hissing through the water. For half a mile, neither man nor dog made a sound. Then Snow nudged the pocket of Marcus's jacket with his nose. Marcus glanced down, then reached in carefully and pulled out the photograph. In the glow of the dashboard, the image became clearer. The boy was small, maybe 10 or 11 when it had been taken, smiling with 2 missing teeth. The man beside him wore a Harbor Ridge work shirt and had one hand resting proudly on Snow's head. But it was the mark on Snow's old collar that stopped Marcus cold. Embossed in faded black letters was a unit tag he had not seen in 7 years. United States Marine Corps Search Unit. And beneath it, almost hidden by the boy's thumb, were 2 letters and a name that made Marcus forget to breathe. S. Cole. Samuel Cole. His brother. Marcus drove carefully down the slick lane, water swirling around the tires, his eyes fixed on the photograph in his hands. The memory of Samuel Cole and the younger Snow pressing into him with a weight he had not expected. The rain had eased slightly, leaving behind the scent of wet pine and freshly turned earth, a smell that carried both danger and familiarity. Snow lay across the seat, wet fur still clinging to his sides, his head resting on Marcus's thigh, amber eyes tracking every movement, every shadow, alert yet weary. The photograph fluttered slightly in Marcus's grip, the corners curling from the rain, and he traced the letters S. Cole with a thumb that shook ever so slightly from a combination of cold, adrenaline, and a sudden rush of remembered grief. He remembered the day Samuel had gone missing during a search operation after the flood, how he had been the one left behind to follow the trail back alone, the empty sky and the sound of rushing water filling his mind like an echo that would never leave. The road ahead was narrow, lined with cypress knees rising from the waterlogged ground, the branches heavy with droplets, creating a canopy that muted the early morning light, making the world feel smaller, enclosed, and urgent. Marcus's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but his eyes never left the photograph. He could feel Snow's weight shift slightly, a quiet nudge against his leg, a gentle reminder that they were not alone in this. Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the damp air, and felt a focus settle over him. There was a plan forming, subtle yet clear, like the lines in a map he had memorized long ago. They would find Noah, the boy in the photograph, and they would make sure no other animals were left to face the water, the cold, or the indifference of those who had chosen to ignore the stakes. The truck crested a small rise, and Marcus saw the outline of Harbor Ridge kennels against the dim gray of the sky, its fences rising like silent sentinels. He slowed to a crawl, water lapping against the tires, and Snow shifted, standing carefully, placing a paw on the seat and peering out at the flooded yard. Marcus followed his gaze, noting the way water pooled around the foundations, the sagging roofs, the broken boards that had been swept aside by the storm. He parked a few feet from the gate, engine still running, and opened the door. The air was thick with dampness, carrying the scent of wet fur, rust, and earth, and Snow stepped out first, shaking lightly, droplets scattering over Marcus's boots, his white coat now a mixture of gray streaks from mud and water. Marcus followed, hand on Snow's back, feeling the tension in the dog's muscles, the readiness that had kept him alive through countless training drills and field operations. The kennel doors loomed ahead, chained and padlocked, a silent challenge, a barrier between what had been left behind and what needed to be saved. Snow approached deliberately, nose low, sniffing the locks, the ground, the edges of the metal panels. Marcus crouched beside him, fingers cold on the rusted chain, heart matching the rhythm of the rain. He could hear the faint sound of water dripping inside the runs, a reminder that the danger had not abated, that life still clung to the wet floorboards and the faded bedding. He worked the padlock carefully, muscles straining slightly, and felt Snow's eyes on him, patient but insistent, as if counting the seconds, marking the rhythm of the rescue. When the lock clicked open, Snow nudged Marcus forward, and together they stepped inside. The water lapped against Marcus's legs, colder than the rain outside, carrying with it the smell of wet straw and animal musk, each breath a reminder of the stakes. Snow moved slowly toward the first kennel, then paused, ears up, nostrils flaring. Marcus followed, and through the gloom he could see another figure, small, crouched behind a support beam, wide-eyed, holding a thin jacket around a trembling frame. Noah, the boy. Snow approached him cautiously, tail low but wagging slightly, a soft whine breaking the sound of dripping water. Noah looked up, eyes wide, then recognition flared. Marcus's chest tightened. He knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible, not rushing, letting the boy take in the presence of a Marine and a dog who had already faced far more than most could imagine. Snow nuzzled Noah gently, pressing his cold, wet nose against the boy's hand, then looked back at Marcus, as if to say the immediate danger was past, but the responsibility had only just begun. Marcus extended a hand toward Noah, speaking softly, guiding him to stand. The rain had eased to a drizzle now, falling in thin lines from the roof, mixing with the mist rising from the flooded yard, and the first faint light of morning painted everything in muted shades of gray and silver. Marcus glanced back at the kennel, at the rows of empty runs, the scattered debris, and the padlocked doors he had forced open, realizing that what had been locked away for so long was now beginning to breathe again, to feel again, to move toward life. Snow pressed closer to Noah, allowing Marcus to stand, and the three of them, wet, cold, but unbroken, moved toward the truck, each step deliberate, measured, a quiet testament to endurance, patience, and the promise that no one, not a child, not a dog, should be left behind to face the flood alone. Marcus guided Noah and Snow through the rain-drenched streets, the truck moving slowly over puddles and shallow streams, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt, creating long streaks of white that danced along the edges of buildings and the waterlogged landscape. The boy held on to Marcus's arm, small fingers gripping the cuff of the Marine's jacket, while Snow padded silently on the running board, ears alert, nose tracing the faint scent of other animals, other lives that had been left behind. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities, thinking about the note, the photograph, and the chain of events that had led him here, each one a reminder of the fragility and resilience of the lives intertwined with this kennel. He could see the faint outline of the veterinary clinic in the distance, a small building with a green roof and a light in the window that cut a warm circle into the gray morning, promising safety, warmth, and clarity. As they approached, Snow's pace slowed, head low, the white coat now streaked with mud and rain, but still carrying the aura of strength and patience that had marked him throughout his training and his service alongside humans. Noah glanced up at Marcus, his eyes wide, searching for reassurance in a world that had shown him too many shadows and sudden dangers. "Is he going to be okay?" the boy whispered. Marcus nodded, a slow movement, deliberate, allowing his calm to fill the space between them. "He is. We are going to make sure of it." The clinic door opened, a bell chiming softly, and Dr. Emily Harper stepped into the vestibule, her coat damp from the drizzle outside, dark hair pulled back, eyes carrying both concern and recognition as she took in the sight of Marcus, the boy, and the soaked dog. She adjusted her glasses and walked forward, her hands outstretched to take Snow from Marcus, who lowered the dog gently onto the mat inside. Snow's legs trembled for a moment, but he kept his eyes on Marcus, amber orbs bright and attentive, as if assuring him that he trusted the decision he had made. Noah followed closely, stepping onto the mat, the dampness of his shoes leaving tiny imprints on the tiled floor, his gaze fixed on Snow, the photograph now pressed carefully in his pocket. Marcus remained a few steps behind, watching Emily examine the dog, listening to the soft sound of her hands running along Snow's soaked fur, the pads of her fingers feeling for warmth, pulse, and muscle tone. The dog did not resist. Instead, he leaned slightly into her touch, head tilting in acknowledgement, amber eyes flicking to Marcus and back to the vet. Emily's voice was low, professional, and calm. He has mild hypothermia, minor abrasions from the floor and chains, and is dehydrated. Nothing life-threatening, but he needs warmth and rest immediately. Marcus nodded, the tension in his shoulders loosening slightly. "We will stay with him until he is stable," he said, and Emily gave a small smile, appreciating the Marine's dedication. Noah moved closer, hands lightly brushing Snow's fur, and the dog responded with a soft whine, tail lifting just a fraction, a signal of recognition and comfort. The rain outside had slowed to a fine mist, tapping lightly against the windows, carrying with it the smell of damp earth, pine, and wet concrete. Marcus thought about the photograph in Noah's pocket, the note, and the lives that had been connected through the kennel, the boy, and the dog, each thread fragile but unbroken. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on Noah's shoulder, feeling the boy relax beneath his touch, and he knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm they had survived to reach this moment. Emily adjusted the blanket around Snow, bringing warmth and gentle pressure, and the dog shifted, settling into the comfort, head resting lightly on Noah's lap, eyes half closed but still attentive. Marcus watched, letting the quiet fill him, the rain, the soft hum of the clinic, the small signs of life and trust weaving together. He looked at Noah, and the boy looked back, and in that brief exchange, unspoken words passed: survival, care, trust, and the beginning of something new. The light outside grew slowly, sun attempting to pierce the clouds, reflecting off the wet asphalt, pooling in puddles, and catching the small beads of rain on the clinic window. Snow gave a soft sigh, the first real exhale Marcus had heard since finding him, and he felt a measure of relief, a small victory in a chain of challenges that had begun long before the storm. The dog's ears twitched, alert to every sound, but his posture was relaxed, leaning slightly into Marcus and Noah as if sharing the quiet warmth of safety. Marcus adjusted his jacket, letting the damp cloth cling to him, listening to the soft dripping of water and the occasional distant rumble of thunder, each sound marking time, each moment a gentle reminder that action, patience, and courage had brought them here. He reached for the note in his pocket once more, smoothing it between his fingers, thinking of the boy, the dog, and the responsibility that had been entrusted to him, and he knew that the path ahead would require focus, care, and the same patience that Snow had shown in the flooded kennel, the same attention that had guided Marcus through his years as a Marine and through every challenge that required steady hands and a calm heart. Marcus sat quietly in the small waiting area of the clinic, the low hum of fluorescent lights above mixing with the distant patter of rain against the windows, as Snow lay stretched across a folded blanket on the tile floor, breathing steadily now, muscles relaxing with each slow exhale. Noah perched beside him, hands resting gently on the damp fur, eyes wide but calm, tracing the lines of Snow's white coat, following the faint streaks of gray that the flood had painted onto him, and Marcus felt a moment of stillness settle over them, a pause in the chaos that had begun only hours earlier. Dr. Emily Harper moved about with careful, deliberate motions, preparing a warm bath for Snow, filling a small tub with water that smelled faintly of herbs and antiseptic, soft steam rising, curling into the air and creating a delicate haze that dulled the fluorescent sharpness, and she spoke quietly, more to herself than anyone, noting temperature, water depth, and the exact way to guide Snow without startling him. How to make him feel safe, secure, and understood. Marcus observed every movement, learning the rhythm, feeling the weight of responsibility press against his ribs, knowing that in moments like this, patience mattered as much as strength, and that his calm would shape the way the dog responded. Noah tilted his head, whispering a question Marcus could not hear clearly over the soft splashing, and Marcus nodded, reassuring the boy with a slight smile that carried more warmth than words could convey. Snow shifted in the blanket, lifting his head slightly, amber eyes meeting Marcus's, a silent conversation passing between them, trust and gratitude exchanged without sound, and Marcus allowed himself a breath he had not realized he had been holding. Outside, the morning light began to filter through the clouds, pale and diffused, washing the clinic in muted shades of gray and silver, and the lingering rain created a soft mist around the building, adding a sense of quiet isolation that made the interior of the clinic feel like a sanctuary removed from time, where decisions could be made slowly and carefully. Marcus ran a hand along Snow's back, feeling the subtle tremor of muscles still tense from exposure and fear, and he murmured softly, words for the dog alone, acknowledging endurance and courage, letting the sound steady both their hearts. Emily guided Snow into the shallow water of the tub, letting the warmth envelop him, the steam rising to mingle with the scent of rain and wet fur, and the dog lowered his head, eyes half closed, the tension in his jaw easing, muscles relaxing with the gentle buoyancy. Marcus stayed close, hand resting lightly on Snow's shoulder, maintaining connection, while Noah leaned in, observing the way Snow's paws moved against the bottom of the tub, learning balance and trust again. The photograph and note Marcus had carried were now on the counter, a reminder of the boy, the hidden truths, and the chain of responsibility that stretched from Harbor Ridge Kennels to the present moment. He glanced at Noah, the boy's eyes reflecting curiosity and cautious optimism, and he knew that this was the point where care and attention would shape the future, where small gestures of warmth and patience could heal far beyond the immediate physical needs. Snow lifted his head again, sniffing the air, ears twitching, and Marcus followed the line of sight to the clinic door, where the storm had passed, but traces of moisture lingered on the steps outside, water dripping from the awning in slow, deliberate beads, the smell of wet earth and grass strong and grounding. The dog settled again, weight resting comfortably on the blanket, tail flicking gently with contentment, and Marcus let the silence envelop them, broken only by the occasional soft splash and Noah's quiet breathing. In that moment, the flood, the fear, the chase, and the uncertainty receded, leaving clarity, presence, and a shared understanding that they were together, that the danger had passed for now, and that the bond between Marine, child, and dog was solidified through patience, care, and unwavering attention. Marcus reached down, brushing mud from Snow's soaked fur, careful not to startle, and whispered encouragement, letting the warmth of voice carry through the stillness. Noah placed a hand over Marcus's, then over Snow's, creating a connection that bound them quietly, each aware of the other's presence, the reassurance, and the shared endurance. Emily stepped back, allowing the dog to adjust to the water and warmth, and Marcus observed, knowing that the lessons of trust and patience, of being present, were as important as the physical rescue, that the subtle details, gestures, and careful attention would leave an imprint far deeper than the storm or the flood ever could. By late morning, the storm had thinned into a silver mist, and the clinic windows glowed with the soft color of a world trying to begin again. Snow stood on a thick towel near the examination table, his white coat no longer gray with floodwater, but still damp in places, curling slightly along his shoulders and chest. He looked tired, but not broken. His amber eyes had sharpened. His ears moved at every sound. Marcus noticed it before anyone else. The dog had rested, eaten half a bowl of warm food, accepted water from Noah's small hand, and let Dr. Emily Harper check his breathing without pulling away. But now something had changed. Snow was watching the door, not with fear, with purpose. Marcus had seen that look in working dogs before. The moment training turned into memory, and memory turned into a mission. Noah sat wrapped in a clinic blanket on a chair by the counter, his shoes drying beneath the heater, the old photograph held carefully in both hands. He had barely spoken since they arrived. Children who had learned to survive silence did not spend words easily. Marcus understood that. He had carried his own silence for 7 years, folded tight inside him like a letter he was too afraid to open. Emily stood at the counter, studying the note beneath a desk lamp. The paper had dried enough for the pencil marks to darken again. Snow knows where they put my dad. The sentence looked smaller now, almost fragile, but it had filled the entire room. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes moving from the note to Noah. Your father worked at Harbor Ridge? Noah nodded once. His name was Daniel Whitaker. His voice came out thin, but steady enough to hold. He fed the retired dogs, cleaned the kennels. He said the old ones deserved respect, because most of them had already given their best years to people. Emily closed her eyes for a second. Not long. Just enough to reveal that the name meant something. Marcus saw it. You knew him. Emily looked down at the counter. Everyone around here knew Daniel. He was kind. Too kind for that place. Noah's fingers tightened around the photograph. Snow left the towel and walked to him, slow but determined, then pressed his head beneath the boy's hand. Noah did not cry. He only bent forward until his forehead touched Snow's. Marcus gave them the quiet. Rainwater dripped from the clinic awning outside, one drop at a time, marking the seconds like a slow clock. Then Noah whispered, "My dad found papers. He said dogs were being signed off as transferred, but they were not going where the papers said. He was going to tell someone." Then Travis said he quit and left town. Marcus felt the air shift. Emily turned away from the note and reached for a drawer beneath the counter. Her hands were steady, but her mouth was pale. She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, with Daniel Whitaker's name written across the front. "He left this with me," she said. "He told me not to open it unless something happened to him or Snow came back." Marcus stared at the envelope. And Snow came back. Emily looked at the dog, then at Noah. "No. Snow brought you back." For a moment, no one moved. The heater hummed. A truck passed outside on the wet road, tires hissing through standing water. Marcus took the envelope when Emily handed it over, and the weight of it seemed far heavier than paper. Inside were copies of transfer forms, kennel intake logs, photographs of collars, and a handwritten map of Harbor Ridge. Several spots were circled in red. One was labeled Old Feed Room. Another read West Storage Floor. A third was marked with two words that made Snow lift his head the moment Marcus spoke them softly. Training Shed. Snow stepped forward and touched his nose to the map. Not anywhere. Exactly there. His paw landed beside the West Storage Floor mark. Then he looked at Marcus with a stillness that made the room feel suddenly too small. Noah sat up. "That is where my dad told me never to go alone." Marcus folded the map carefully. "Then we do not go alone." Emily reached for the phone, but Marcus raised a hand. "Call Sheriff Dana Mills. Not Harbor Ridge Security. Not County Animal Control. Just Sheriff Mills." Emily nodded, understanding the difference. Marcus had learned a long time ago that truth had to be carried to the right hands, or the wrong ones would bury it before daylight. Snow moved to the clinic door and waited. He was weak, still recovering, still wrapped in the ache of cold water and confinement. But there was something unshakable in the way he stood. Not a dog begging to be saved anymore. A witness asking to be followed. Marcus knelt in front of him and fastened a clean leash to the temporary collar Emily had placed around his neck. The collar was plain blue nylon, nothing like the old working collar in the photograph, but Snow held himself as if it were a service vest. Noah rose from the chair, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. "I am coming." Marcus looked at him, at the small face, trying so hard to be brave. "You stay with Dr. Harper until the sheriff gets here." Noah started to protest, but Snow turned and stepped close, gently pressing his body against the boy's knees. It was not refusal. It was promise. Noah understood. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Bring him home." Marcus looked at Snow, then out at the pale road leading back toward the kennels. "We will bring back what the flood could not wash away." Marcus returned to Harbor Ridge with Snow riding beside him in silence, the blue leash resting across the seat like a quiet line between past and present. The rain had stopped, but the whole world still dripped. Water fell from oak branches in slow beads. Ditches along the road were swollen and brown. A thin fog clung to the low fields beyond Beaufort, softening the edges of mailboxes, fence posts, and the distant marsh until everything looked half-remembered. Snow kept his nose close to the cracked window, breathing in the morning with careful intent. Every few seconds, his ears shifted. Left, forward, back again. Marcus did not speak. He had learned not to crowd a working dog with unnecessary words. A dog like Snow was already listening to more than a human could name. When the kennel came into view, Marcus killed the headlights and let the truck roll the last 50 feet over gravel. Harbor Ridge looked smaller in daylight, and somehow worse. The storm had stripped away the false order. Boards leaned loose against the runs. Yellow leaves floated in puddles. A county sign hung crooked near the front office, knocking softly against its post each time the breeze passed through. Travis Blake's truck was gone. That did not comfort Marcus. Men like Travis rarely disappeared without leaving something behind to watch for them. Marcus stepped out first, scanning the yard, then opened Snow's door. The dog climbed down slowly, still stiff from the cold and the night before, but his eyes were clear. He did not pull toward the kennel where Marcus had found him. He turned instead toward the west side of the property, toward an older storage building half hidden behind stacked feed pallets and a leaning wall of corrugated tin. Marcus unfolded Daniel Whitaker's map and checked the red circle marked West Storage Floor. Snow was already walking. The leash stayed loose. That told Marcus everything. They crossed the yard through ankle-deep water, past empty runs and rusted buckets, past a row of faded plastic doghouses that smelled of rain, old straw, and abandonment. Snow paused once near a kennel door, sniffed the bottom edge, then moved on. Not there. Not yet. Marcus followed. His boots made soft sucking sounds in the mud. The morning air carried the faint sharp scent of bleach from the main office, too fresh for a property that was supposed to be closed. Someone had cleaned in a hurry. Snow noticed it too. His nostrils flared, but he did not stop. The storage building door had been locked with a new padlock, shiny against weathered wood. Marcus looked at it for a moment, then at Snow. Of course, he murmured. He did not force it open right away. Instead, he took out his phone and photographed the lock, the door frame, the mud tracks near the threshold, and the small smear of white fur caught on a splinter near the bottom hinge. Snow watched, patient but tense. Marcus had learned the difference between rushing and moving with purpose. Truth needed proof. Grace still needed a record. When he finished, he used the tire iron from his truck to pry the old hasp away from the rotted frame. The door gave with a tired groan. The smell inside came out first. Damp wood, paper, old feed. Something closed up for too long. Snow stepped over the threshold and froze. His body lowered, not in fear, but concentration. The building was narrow and dim, lit only by gray daylight slipping through cracks in the walls. Sacks of kibble were stacked along one side, some split open, pellets scattered across the floor like brown hail. Metal shelves lined the other wall, holding leashes, plastic bins, worn towels, and boxes labeled with dates. Marcus swept his flashlight across the floor. There were water stains everywhere, but one section near the back looked different. The boards had been replaced. New wood. Too clean. Snow walked straight to it and placed one paw on the seam. Then he looked back. Marcus knelt, running his fingers along the edge. The boards were screwed down. Fresh screws. He took another photograph, then worked them loose one by one, the quiet scrape of metal sounding loud in the still room. Snow stood over him, breathing steadily, eyes fixed on the floor as if the past itself were waiting underneath. When the last screw came free, Marcus lifted the board. Beneath it was not what he expected. Not a grave. Not anything that belonged in the dark. It was a sealed plastic storage box, wedged carefully between floor joists, dry and untouched by the flood. Marcus pulled it out and set it on the floor. Snow lowered his nose to the lid and gave one soft whine. Inside were collars. Dozens of them. Some leather, some nylon, some still bearing faded tags from police departments, search teams, and military programs. Each one had been removed from a dog whose file probably said transferred, adopted, or retired. Marcus felt his throat tighten, but he stayed steady. He turned each tag gently until one caught the light. United States Marine Corps Search Unit. Valor. Another. Sheriff K-9 Unit. Bell. Another. Civilian Rescue. Atlas. Then, beneath the collars, wrapped in a towel, was an old cell phone and a small notebook sealed in a freezer bag. The notebook belonged to Daniel Whitaker. Marcus opened it carefully. The handwriting was plain, practical, filled with dates, intake numbers, names of dogs, and notes written by a man trying to make truth survive long enough to be found. On the last page, Daniel had written one line larger than the rest. Snow remembers the training shed, and he will not leave a child behind. Snow suddenly lifted his head. From outside came the faint crunch of tires on wet gravel. Marcus closed the notebook, slid the phone into his jacket, and replaced the lid on the box. Snow moved to the doorway, quiet as breath. Through the crack, Marcus saw Sheriff Dana Mills pull in beside the fence, followed by Dr. Emily Harper's small car. Noah sat in the back seat, wrapped in the clinic blanket, his face pale behind the glass. Marcus stepped outside with the box in his arms. Noah saw it, then saw Snow, and pressed one hand to the window. Snow gave one short bark, not loud, not panicked, but clear enough to carry across the yard. Noah opened the car door before Emily could stop him and stood in the wet gravel. His eyes went to the storage building, then to Marcus. "That is where he hid it," the boy whispered. Marcus nodded. "Your father made sure someone would find it." Sheriff Mills, a calm woman in her 50s with rain silvering the brim of her hat, looked from the box to Snow, then to the open floor behind Marcus. She did not ask if he was sure. Some evidence spoke before people did. Snow turned again, facing the far end of the property, where an old training shed sat under dripping trees. His body went still. Noah's breath caught. "That is where Snow kept looking," he said. "That is where my dad said the truth would finish itself." Marcus clipped the leash more securely in his hand and looked toward the shed. The day had grown brighter, but beneath those trees, the shadows remained. Snow took one step forward, then waited for Marcus to follow. The training shed stood silent, drenched in the lingering mist of the morning, the walls streaked with rain and shadowed under dripping oaks. Snow moved ahead, cautious but steady, amber eyes focused, muscles coiled yet relaxed, each paw placing lightly on the sodden ground. Marcus followed, holding the leash loosely in one hand, the other hand resting on the shoulder of Noah, who walked slowly beside him, small and quiet but attentive, absorbing every detail. The air smelled of wet pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic tang of old metal from the shed. Marcus could hear the soft crunch of his boots on gravel and mud, interspersed with the occasional patter of water dripping from leaves above. Snow paused at the doorway, head tilted, sniffing the air, then nudged forward, indicating the way inside. The shed's interior was dim, light seeping through cracks in the wooden walls, illuminating the scattered remnants of training equipment, old mats, and crates stacked neatly against one side. Marcus approached the far corner where Snow had stopped, and there he saw the small cache that had been hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Carefully, he lifted the wooden panel, revealing a collection of worn collars, each tagged with a name and a date, some of which corresponded to dogs previously thought lost or relocated. The collars smelled faintly of old leather and fur, a tangible record of lives that had been forgotten by some and preserved by others. Noah reached forward, touching the topmost collar gently, his eyes wide as he traced the letters embossed faintly in the leather. Marcus knelt beside him, letting the boy's hand rest on his own, sharing the weight of discovery without words. Snow circled the pile, nose to each collar, nudging one slightly, tail swishing slowly, his presence calm yet insistent, signaling the importance of every detail. Marcus picked up a folded notebook found within the cache, flipping through pages filled with precise handwriting, dates, and notes regarding each dog. Each entry revealed stories of care, of loyalty, of dedication, and sometimes of fear. Snow remained at the edge, ears perked, waiting, watching. Outside, the mist began to lift slightly, sunlight diffusing through clouds, casting a soft glow across the wet yard. Marcus called softly to Snow, and the dog turned, acknowledging the command, while keeping a careful watch on the boy and the surroundings. Noah sat down on a dry patch of floor, still tracing collars with his hands, and whispered the names aloud, almost reverently, connecting memory with present moment. Marcus carefully documented each collar and entry in the notebook, ensuring nothing was left unrecorded, understanding that these small details were the bridge between the past and the justice that would now follow. Snow nudged Marcus once, reminding him of their shared purpose, and together they moved toward the shed doorway, Noah following, carrying the small notebook with care. The wind outside carried the faint sounds of approaching vehicles. Sheriff Dana Mills arrived first, followed by Dr. Emily Harper, both watching attentively as Marcus explained the significance of each collar and document. Snow stood firm, steadfast, ears twitching, as though affirming the importance of the moment, acknowledging that the work of rescue and revelation was nearing its completion. Marcus handed collars, documents, and photographs to the sheriff and Emily, explaining details quietly, pointing to names and dates, letting the evidence speak. The boy looked up, eyes meeting Marcus's, and for a fleeting second, trust and understanding passed between them, unspoken but complete. Snow nudged Noah gently, and the boy smiled softly, the first real expression of relief and recognition. Outside, the clouds began to break, shafts of sunlight reaching the wet grass, reflecting on puddles, illuminating the property in warm, dappled light. Marcus, Snow, and Noah stood together, three forms bound by resilience, shared experience, and a quiet determination to restore what had been overlooked. Snow lowered his head to Noah's shoulder, tail moving with gentle rhythm, and Marcus felt a sense of closure, not loud or triumphant, but quiet, absolute. The collars, the documents, the hidden truths had been discovered. The dogs would be accounted for. Justice, measured and patient, would follow. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and pine, and Marcus rested a hand lightly on Snow's head, letting the moment linger. Noah's fingers trailed over the dog's damp fur, a silent promise of care and protection. Together, they turned toward the clinic vehicles waiting outside, moving with calm, deliberate steps, carrying with them the weight of discovery, the hope of restoration, and the quiet grace of having done what needed to be done. The sunlight grew stronger, water glistening on leaves and grass, and in that glow, the three of them walked forward, not just from the shed, but into the promise of days where vigilance, loyalty, and gentle courage would continue to safeguard lives that had been left behind.